Please welcome to the stage the Head of Developer Relations for AWS Asia Pacific Japan, Chris Howard.
Hello, everybody. Before I get started, I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, and thank you so much for being here. I am so stoked. You cannot believe it. Can I begin by just telling you all a little story? I first attended the AWS Summit Sydney in 2017. Were any of you at the 2017 summit? A few people were. Awesome. That was 7 years ago, you guys. And I recall it was at the Hordern Pavilion. Am I right about that, right? Which I remember it was a round venue, and all the breakout rooms were like pie wedge shaped. And one of the things I have this very clear memory of was in the morning before the keynote, there was this really loud music. This guy was DJing by dragging music samples between swim lanes on a Jira Kanban board, which I know sounds like a fever dream that I made up, but I actually found a picture that I took of it. DJ Kanban. That was a real thing. And I remember being blown away by the energy and enthusiasm that day. Not just for DJ Kanban, he was lit, but for the AWS developer community. This was before I worked for AWS. This was a good year before I worked for them. But I looked around that room and I thought, I want to be on that stage someday. So I got to AWS, and for the last 6 years, I have been trying. I've had this bucket list goal of being on stage at Summit. 2020, I was supposed to have my chance. You all know what happened that year. But finally here, it's actually happening. I get to tick it off. Thank you so much for being here with me. Whether this is your first summit or whether you're an old-timer and you've been to every single one of them, really appreciate it. And I hope you're having as much fun today as I am. So speaking of fun, who here has heard of Amazon Party Rock? Right? Yeah, okay, good. A few people have. For those who haven't, Party Rock is a really fast and fun way to learn about generative AI, buzzword of the day, by getting hands-on, building applications in a playground powered by Amazon Bedrock. And we released it last year. We've had some really phenomenal response. It teaches you some key skills like prompt engineering, chain of thought reasoning. You get to try out different foundation models. And so I wanted to kick things off today by showing off some really cool Party Rock stuff. And to do that, I need to invite on a friend of mine, a member of that AWS developer community here in Australia. So please welcome to the stage Stephen Sennett, who is a senior consultant at Kinetic IT in Melbourne. Please welcome to the stage, Stephen.
Here we are.
Here we are. I should have mentioned, Stephen is also one of our amazing AWS community builders.
Among other things, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. Now, I invited you here because you built something really cool off the back of Party Rock.
Absolutely.
But before you talk about that, can you actually show everybody how Party Rock works?
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things with Party Rock is that when we talk about generative AI applications, we often think about things that, when we're building apps, we think about things that developers can build. Developers with tools and technology. But the great thing with Party Rock is that it enables anyone to experiment with building generative AI applications. So we have a look here. We can see our nice front for Party Rock, which includes things like the Haiku Creator, for example, all these nice demonstrative apps. But what if we actually want to build an app of our own? The great thing with Party Rock is we can actually go ahead and build our own app, and all we need to give it is just a prompt. We just need to give it some text to explain what we want the app to do. So for example here, I'm not someone who's very creative with my food, so I want to get an app that's going to be able to help tell me what I want to be able to cook for dinner and have a nice drink with it. So I'm going to go, just give it a very simple prompt, and we're going to click Generate App. And based on that, it's going to have enough information to actually build out an app that looks like this, and it's given it the name Meal Mocktail Planner. So there's a few things to this. We have the little bit up there at the top where we have some documentation. We have the user input, where we're going to input some information about our day. Going down a little bit further, we can see we have the meal plan, the mocktail recipe coming out of that we're going to have. So it's going to use that with Amazon Bedrock powering some large language models to generate some text, and also some pictures as well. So after today, this is going to be a very long day, so I'm going to be feeling like something very delicious after today. And so Chris knows what's coming next. So I'm going to be having a long day here at Summit, and I want something hearty and warm, but quick and easy to prepare. That's how I tend to feel about most of my meals. So we'll go ahead and let that run, and just from entering that, it's going to go ahead and run our information here through PartyRock, and it's going to give me a nice meal plan, which sounds pretty tasty. I think that sounds pretty all right to me. And it's also given me a mocktail recipe as well to go along with that. Now, the cool thing is it's doing the text generation here with Anthropic's Claude model. Going down a little bit lower, it's also using Stable Diffusion to generate some images based on the descriptions it's getting from those meal recipes. So there we go. We've got both our meal and also our drink as well. And from this, we can also go ahead and modify this a little bit. Maybe we don't just want one single meal, or maybe we want one single meal instead of 3. We can actually tweak the prompt that was created to modify it a little bit more to suit our solution. So we have the ability to experiment and refine how we're building these things. And likewise, if we want to extend this a little bit further, we could come down to the bottom of the page and actually add more things. We could actually add more widgets to extend the functionality of our application. So I could add in additional input. I might want more input from the user, adding some documentation, or adding in more AI generations, like even including things like a chatbot as well. Very, very simple to add and made very simple with PartyRock.
I really think that I would drink that mocktail. That actually looks really tasty, Stephen.
Very
Now-
unhealthy too.
Very healthy. Now that was very cool, but I didn't just get here to talk about that because you actually built something really cool off the back of PartyRock called GenStack. Can you actually tell everybody what is GenStack and why did you build it?
Absolutely. So when PartyRock came out, something I found interesting was the fact that it's great for experimentation, but perhaps not quite so good for being able to actually take something, productionize it, build on it, and taking something beyond just PartyRock. So I came up with this idea for an open source solution called GenStack. And there's a nice QR code to the blog up there on the site. And basically what GenStack does is it will take your PartyRock application and generate from that a full JavaScript front end that you can deploy anywhere onto your environment, which basically lets you take your PartyRock app and then host it internally on your infrastructure within your Bedrock account, so you can experiment a little bit more fully than you might be able to do on PartyRock, but still retaining all the flexibility.
So I love it. So you're taking what could just be seen as like a little toy, but you're actually using it to create something real. Can you show us? Show us GenStack in action?
Absolutely. So the first thing we'll do is we'll jump back to our meal mocktail planner. Now, by default in PartyRock, everything that we create is going to be in there privately. It's all private to our account. We can also go ahead and share that. We can make our apps public, which is nice. We can share them around, and we have our nice little thing to tinker with. But from this, I'm going to copy the link to the clipboard, and that link is going to be what I'm going to use as the input for GenStack. So we'll jump across to GenStack, and when we come across to there, we'll get a fairly simple UI. So as we jump across to there, did it pause?
There it goes.
So with this, we have the front end for our application. So we'll go ahead and put in the link to our PartyRock app that we did just pull right out of PartyRock. And we also have some modifications we can put in, whether we want to use an embedded theme very similar to PartyRock, or whether we want to use things like SST to deploy our application very readily as well. So from that, all we need to do is click on Generate App. And what that's going to do is it's going to run some things in the back end, again, completely open source code if anyone's interested. It's going to create a zip file. And that zip file we can then download to our local machine and use that to actually deploy our application. So going into this, we'll just pop open a terminal, and we'll go ahead and have a look. We can see our zip file there that GenStack has given us, which is sitting there nicely. We'll go ahead and unzip that just to see the contents of it, and just see this is a very simple JavaScript application. If ever you've worked with JavaScript before, it's fairly similar. So I'll bring that out and just have a bit of a look at the contents. And we can see package.json. We can see all the things you would normally find in this kind of front-end app. It's all been built out very nicely for us. And in order to run this, because it's all built around Node.js and SvelteKit, we just have to go ahead and do an npm install to go ahead and install the dependencies for our application. And by running it in development mode, we can run it on our local machine. So from this, we have the front end ready to go on our local host. We'll click into that, have a bit of a look around, and we can see this is looking pretty similar to what we had within PartyRock. The one difference is that this is something you can then experiment on top of. So for example, if I want to ask it about something, maybe I want something a little bit more uniquely Australian, a little bit greasy, cheesy, something like that, it's going to give me a couple of options here. So for example, again, our meal plan's similar to before. It's giving me a nice 3-course meal. What do we have? Meat pies, a burger with a lot, lamingtons. That sounds pretty good. For our drink, it's giving us a Vegemite shandy mocktail.
No.
Okay, so generative AI is doing its own thing here, so we won't worry too much about that. But the interesting thing from this, we still have everything plugged in with the image generation. We can still do exactly as we would do within PartyRock, but run within our own infrastructure for our front end, and also using Amazon Bedrock in our own account, so we have some of those guardrails in place.
Stephen, that is just so cool. I love that you've done this. Please check out his blog post if you want to learn more about it. Now, I have to let Stephen go because he's going to be giving a lightning talk on generative AI over in the expo at the Developer Lounge right after this session. So please give a big round of applause to Stephen, and we'll let him go.
Thank you.
See, the AWS community have really helped get PartyRock off the ground. The response has been fantastic. My team actually ran a PartyRock hackathon the last few months. And if you go to that QR code there, that will take you to community.aws, the home of the AWS community, where you can see a lot of the apps that people have been submitting. There have been some very creative ideas. And actually, that one on the right there, that's the app that I built. In case you can't tell from my fabulous ensemble, one of my hobbies is making my own clothes. I like to knit and so my app is an ugly Christmas sweater generator. And I had a lot of fun building it, and of course it is kind of a funny toy, but it actually has given me a lot of ideas for things that I might want to knit this winter. And so really for my session today, I'm going to talk about creativity throughout. It's really a theme that I want to sort of really emphasize for all of you, because I do think that for developers, generative AI really presents so many opportunities for you and your teams to make things easier, to innovate faster, and to bring really cool new ideas into the world. So, real talk, what am I going to talk about today? Well, first, I'm going to show you how we at AWS are innovating to try and do exactly what I just said, to allow you to accelerate development and enhance your creativity. Next, I'm going to provide you and tell you about some tools, some AI, some non-AI, that we've built, but that have been built responsibly, prioritizing privacy, security, and quality. And lastly, as Stephen said, we want as many builders as possible to be empowered, so I'm going to talk about some of the ways we're doing that, trying to make it possible for everyone to build on the AWS cloud. Now, I've been working in the Sydney tech industry for nearly 20 years now, and a lot of what I understood as fact earlier in my career about software engineering, no longer true. Okay, I used to think that creating modern apps, you need a team of devs, writing hundreds, thousands of lines of code over weeks or months to ship something. You need people with experience across the full stack. Creating complex application architectures requires people with years of battle scars. You need to spend a lot of time researching different trade-offs. You need to spend a lot of time wiring up front ends and back ends. And of course, maintaining your applications, well, that was usually a whole separate team, right, who were responsible for fixing bugs and running updates and patches and maintaining all your deployments. And really, what we're seeing over the last year or two is that Gen AI is changing so much of this. It's making it possible to reduce or even in some cases eliminate a lot of that stuff. A lot of that, you're going to keep hearing this phrase, undifferentiated heavy lifting. I know we say it a lot. But it's all the stuff you have to do in your day that isn't writing code, that keeps you from creative problem solving, which is probably why you went into software engineering in the first place. And the goal, of course, is to allow you to build without limits. Because it turns out that when you take those frictions away, the possibilities are really profound. Maybe over the last year or two, you've started to play around with some of the tools that have come out. I know I have. Maybe you've started to see some of the impacts on your own workflow. But just a word of caution, one of the things I've noticed is that some of the tools that are available have been trained on low-quality, error-filled material. And what does that mean? It means you get poor guidance that may not actually give you the right answers you're looking for. Some of these tools don't provide proper attribution, meaning you could be in for a licensing issue down the track. And of course, they may not integrate nicely with your other AWS tools you're using. So we at AWS are prioritizing responsible use of AI so you can build confidently with tools that give you high-quality guidance and that are integrated into your existing workflows. And that's why we introduced into general availability last year Amazon Code Whisperer, which helps you build applications faster but also more securely by generating recommendations and suggestions in your code in near real time. It supports, as of, I checked yesterday, 15 programming languages, Java, JavaScript, Python, many more. And you can use Code Whisperer in your favorite IDE, in VS Code, in IntelliJ, in AWS Cloud9, and many more. Now, Code Whisperer has been trained on billions of lines of code. And we're pretty confident that it can give you accurate recommendations across a wide range of programming use cases. But more importantly, we've trained it on high-quality AWS examples. And we are confident that Amazon Code Whisperer can give really accurate and fast recommendations for integrating with AWS services, you know, your EC2, your S3, your Lambda. But just to be clear, you don't have to just use it with AWS. You can use it with general programming use cases as well. And just to give you an example, we actually did an engagement recently with MongoDB, where we provide now enhanced code recommendations for building applications with MongoDB databases. And we did that by getting curated training material that focused on best practices for doing that, so you should check that out. Now, I also talked about potential licensing issues. Like, we're really prioritizing responsible code generation. So with Code Whisperer, you can filter or flag code suggestions that resemble open source training material so that you can reference those or you can license them to make sure that you do not inadvertently use code that you are not supposed to. And you can also filter or flag those suggestions that might be biased or unfair as well. And look, if you tried out Code Whisperer early, you may not be aware of some of the new things that we've added to Code Whisperer over the last year. One really cool one is security scanning, as I mentioned. Actually, in the IDE, you can actually trigger a security scan that's going to check your code for a number of common vulnerabilities. And we also have a generative AI-powered capability that's going to recommend remediation. In other words, it's going to find bugs for you faster and allow you to fix them faster, which is going to make your code more secure. Now look, I have many former coworkers in this room. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Chris, that sounds great, but I actually have to work in a team with other people. I have to work with internal code. And I know this. It's very rare that we're writing code on our own, right? When you join a new company, you have to make sure that the code you write complies with all the internal specifications, with their SDKs, their APIs, their libraries, packages, and classes. And until recently, inline coding tools were limited to recommending code based on public data. They just weren't aware of your internal code. And so what does that mean? If you're starting in a new company, it means you're probably going to have to spend some time getting up to speed. You're going to have to study the code, try and figure out your way around the code base. If you're lucky, you might have some documentation to read. You know, maybe you pester a senior developer to help you out. It can take a lot of your time. And that's why I was really excited to see we launched at the end of last year in preview a new customization capability for Code Whisperer. That means you can now get tailored suggestions for your internal code base that comply with your SDKs, your libraries, package classes. And of course, admins can actually control who gets access to which customizations for security. And the really important thing is that these customizations are isolated. We never use your Code Whisperer content to train the underlying models. I also want to show you my favorite of the new capabilities in Code Whisperer. Let's talk about the command line. You know, command line used by probably everyone in this room most every day to sort of write software, to build, run, debug, deploy. But despite the fact how critical it is to all of us every day, it actually hasn't changed that much since like the 70s. You know, it is notoriously hard for newbies to get their head around. There are thousands of command line applications, some of which have very esoteric syntax. I can never remember them. And so what we often see is people context switching, like they're actually having to refer to documentation or switch to the browser to look up commands. And so I was really excited that we brought out Code Whisperer for the command line, which solves these challenges with CLI completions and natural language to code translation for your existing command line. And so what we really see is that for beginners, for people starting out, this makes the command line, it allows them to get up to speed so much faster. And even if you are a more advanced developer, it's probably going to give you some productivity gains as well. Just to show you it in action, what you get with this is you get type-ahead completions with inline documentation for like 500 command line apps. You know, Git, NPM, Docker, also, of course, AWS. And what this is going to do, it's going to reduce the amount of time you spend typing repetitive boilerplate code into your terminal. It's going to reduce the amount of time you spend context switching, referring to things back into the browser. And it's going to make it faster for you to learn new applications and new commands as well. As I said, it works with your existing command line. I use iTerm2 on the Mac. It works great with that. It works with the native Mac terminal. Also works with the terminal in your favorite IDEs, in VS Code, in IntelliJ, all of those. And so you just download it and you get started in minutes. But I know it sounds like a small thing, like completions in the terminal. The time you save really does add up. And I'm sorry to tell you guys, like we've seen studies that show that the majority of a developer's time not actually spent writing code. I actually read one last week that stunned me. It said only 10% of developers spend more than 2 hours a day writing code. And it's like, what are y'all doing for the other 5 to 6 hours of your day? Well, think about it. Think about everything you have to do from the time you get a ticket to the time you merge code that isn't writing code. There's a lot. There's a lot of time wasted in there. And so really what we want to do is help reduce that as much as possible. And so what we did is we looked at every single facet of the software development lifecycle to try and find ways that AI could reduce that, could make that better for you. So we can go through these very briefly, but let's talk about the planning phase first. As I said, let's pretend I've joined a new company, I'm a new developer, and I've got a task. I need to build some sort of little application. Well, the first thing I need to do, I need to understand the requirements. I need to think about the functional and non-functional requirements. I need to make sure I understand the problem space. Am I using APIs, SDKs that I've never used before? What technologies and services am I using? I'm sorry to tell anybody new, there are more than 200 AWS services, so you got to figure out which ones you need for a given problem. What trade-offs might I have to make when building this, you know? There's lots of things you have to think about. And I could spend a lot of time just reading blog posts and reading documentation. And what I really need is I need an expert who can sit beside me and sort of help me narrow down the list of things that I need to think about. And so to address this, we released last year Amazon Q Developer at re:Invent. Actually, we released Amazon Q as of like this week. It's called Q Developer. And Q Developer is your interactive and personalized generative AI-powered assistant that's been trained on 17 years of high-quality AWS examples. It is that senior developer sitting next to you that can help you when you get stuck, just to suggest some other things to you. It's available pretty much anywhere you need it. It's in the console, it's in the IDE, it's in the documentation, lots of places. And we really see this speeding up a broad range of tasks, you know, from that planning phase where you're trying to get ideas for how you might address a solution, through to actually writing and building secure and scalable applications. It can help you with troubleshooting, and I'll show you an example of that, of how to actually troubleshoot apps you're building or apps that are running in production. It can even help optimization, you know, optimize performance and spend for apps that you already have. And of course, admins can decide who has access to those capabilities. But one of the things I've noticed with Q is that depending on where you invoke it, it sort of has like almost like different personalities. And so the first sort of personality of Q Developer I want to introduce you to is Q Developer in the console. Because before I joined DevRel, I was a solutions architect. I'm sure those of you who are customers, you probably have a solutions architect you talk to here at AWS. And we used to joke in the SA team that we should build SA as a service, because we would get questions, the same questions over and over again from customers. And really, that's how I kind of think about Q Developer in the console. Q Developer in the console is an expert in AWS well-architected practices, in our documentation and different solutions implementations. And you can have a conversation with Q Developer right in the console. You can help it understand your requirements, your constraints, your preferences, and it's going to start giving you ideas. You can explore different options, explore trade-offs. You can see best practices. And importantly, every single response we give you has links to the source material. You do not just have to take this as a given. You can actually click through, see why we're recommending that, and dive deep into the results. And one pro tip I've seen just from my own experimentation: don't accept the first response it gives you. Try rewording your question in a few different ways. I've found that often brings back different answers. And also, every single answer will have a little thumbs up and thumbs down below it. Please click that. We use that. We're refining this model. And so if you get a really good response back, click the thumbs up. The service team asked me to mention that. It's really, really important. So you can use Q Developer in the console. Let's imagine I'm this developer building this app. I've now got a really good idea of what I want to build, and so it's time to move on to the actual coding. And as I mentioned, Q Developer can help you there too. It can help you in the IDE actually write your app. It can help you with troubleshooting, and I will show you a little bit about how we can do that. But the personality that you're going to interact with is Q Developer in the IDE, because Q is available as part of the Code Whisperer experience in your IDE. And the reason I call these different personalities is this Q Developer knows about your code, because it's in the IDE with your code. So think about this. If you have to add new functionality to an existing bit of code, you have to spend time figuring out what is it doing? Like, who wrote this? What were they thinking? And if you're lucky, you have access to that person. But with Q Developer, you can actually ask Q to summarize, what is this function doing? What are the dependencies? What do I need to know about this? You can get to summarize the architecture involved. So it's really, really powerful. It's basically your ultimate reference guide and cheat sheet. And so I want to show you how I can use this. Imagine I'm a Java developer, and I've worked out that I want to build a little app, a little Java application using Spring Boot that calls GitHub's API and returns some information. So here I've got VS Code, and I've got actually Q Developer on the side there, and I'm going to do a little chat. So I'm actually going to ask Q Developer in the IDE, how can I build this Spring Boot app that is going to hit the GitHub API, and it's going to return some projects to me. And you can see Q Developer is giving me steps to follow with links to documentation. So I can actually follow those and get more information. But this, I'll be honest, it's not the entire steps. You'll see this. There are bits that are missing, but this is enough to get me going. It's enough to get me over the hurdle. It's enough to give me some ideas on what I need to do. And I can start following this process and building my app. Okay, so I've built most of my app, and as I mentioned, I realized that there's a bit of functionality missing. I need a class to actually handle the projects that are coming back from the GitHub API. So I can actually go back in the console to Q Developer and ask it to help me create this projects class. That's what I'm going to do here. And it's going to give me the steps that I need to take to do this. And it has the context. Because of the questions I've already asked it, the conversation, I don't have to give it all that again. It's actually continuing off the context that I've already given it, and so it's telling me what I need to do to go in and actually create this class and add new functionality to my application. Fast forward, last one. Imagine I've built the whole thing, and of course, it's now time to actually test it. So like any good developer, I'm going to just assume that my code's going to work right off the bat, right? So I'm going to run the application, start it up. I'm going to open a browser window, and we're all just going to watch as it works perfectly the first time, right? That's what we're all expecting to happen here. Look at my browser history. That's fine. Error. As you might expect, there's an error. Well, I'm kind of rusty as a Java developer. I don't know how to debug this. I can scroll back up in the terminal, look for the error. I have no idea what this error means. But I know that Q Developer can probably point me in the right direction. So I'm literally going to copy and paste it and ask it, how do I fix this? And Q Developer is actually going to come back and tell me that there's a problem with this ID field, and it's going to tell me how to remediate it. The other place I have found really helpful with troubleshooting is actually in the AWS Lambda console. If you actually have one of your Lambda functions that fails, you'll actually get a button now, troubleshoot this, and it will go straight into a session with Q where it's going to tell you. It's always a permissions issue with Lambda, but it's very helpful for troubleshooting both apps as you're building them and apps that are already running in production. All right, last phase is improving and transforming your applications, because building and running a secure app isn't just you do it once and it's perfect forever, right? There are always patches coming out, security, performance patches. This is more work. You got to decide, okay, which applications are we going to upgrade? Which libraries are we going to upgrade to? We actually have to do the upgrade, then we got to rewrite all the unit tests, we got to make sure we didn't break everything. That can take a long time. I know that in some companies, this effort can take months or even years. And that is keeping your development teams from using their creativity and launching new stuff for customers. So Q Developer can help you here too. We released a new Q Developer code transformation capability that'll help you upgrade and transform your applications in a fraction of the time. So starting with Java, with just a couple clicks, Q Developer can perform language upgrades, such as from Java 8 to Java 17, which are going to allow you to take advantage of the latest security and performance enhancements. And coming soon, you're going to be able to do .NET Framework to cross-platform .NET upgrades, which are really going to help you move applications from Windows to Linux a lot faster. And of course, moving away from legacy proprietary operating systems to the latest open source operating systems, that comes with security and performance benefits, but also probably a hefty cost savings. So all you have to do is ask Amazon Q Developer to perform the code transformation. It is literally going to handle the rest of it for you. It's going to identify and update the mandatory package dependencies and frameworks. It's actually going to go through and update and replace the deprecated code. It is even going to run tests to verify that the upgrade worked. And to put our money where our mouth is, we actually had a 5-person team at Amazon that recently upgraded 1,000 production applications from Java 8 to Java 17. It took them 2 days. On average, every application took 10 minutes, and even the longest ones took less than an hour. And previously, on average, we would have said around 2 to 3 days per application. So this is a massive game changer. This is going to really free up your development teams in terms of transforming your applications. Now look, I have gone so fast through Code Whisperer and Q Developer. If you want to learn more about these topics, we have so many sessions today, tomorrow. There is actually a really good one after this, which is called Supercharge Your Development with AWS Generative AI Developer Tools, where my colleagues Nicola and Pav are going to go deep on this stuff. So if you want a deeper dive, please check those out. But I have one final topic to get to. We have not talked about DevOps yet. And it turns out that developing applications these days requires increasingly complex orchestration of tools, technologies, processes, and people. And DevOps culture is what brings all that together and empowers people to do their best work. But if you want your teams to operate without silos, you need tools that aren't siloed. You need every team to start out with pre-integrated tools that just work as a cohesive solution from the very beginning, that get everything right from day one and scale correctly with best practices. And so to address that challenge, we released Amazon Code Catalyst. Code Catalyst brings together everything you need to streamline development and delivery on AWS. Code Catalyst blueprints, for example, get projects started in minutes. They have everything you need, from project code, CI/CD pipelines that deploy right to your AWS account. Code Catalyst dev environments are development workstations in the cloud. They're pre-configured with project code, with dependencies, with all the tools you need. They're wired into your favorite IDE, and they allow developers to just drop in to the project code without having to reconfigure their machine every single time. Code Catalyst also has built-in project management. It works with your Git workflow, so you can assign code reviews, you can assign pull requests, and we really wanted with Code Catalyst to make it opinionated enough to get you started quickly, but flexible enough that you could adapt it to your needs. And it does work with tools that you're already probably using, like GitHub and Jira. So I really want to dive deeper into Code Catalyst blueprints. These are very, very powerful. And with blueprints, as I said, you just choose the type of application you want to build, and it's going to generate everything you need to build, deploy, and maintain your application. So that's the infrastructure, that's the application code, that's issue boards, CI/CD workflows. And so when we released this, customers got really excited about the possibilities, and they said to us, that's great, how do we make our own? And so at reInvent, we actually announced as part of the new enterprise tier, we actually brought out the capability for you to build your own custom blueprints, along with the abilities, some capabilities that make it easy for you to keep your project in sync as blueprints change. Now, I actually wanted to bring out an expert to show you this. So my final guest for today, I'd like to welcome to the stage, is my colleague, Adrian Dimmick, Principal Prototyping Engineer here at AWS. Welcome, Adrian.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone.
Hey, Adrian. Now, your team have made really heavy use of blueprints, so why? What advantages does it give you?
Yeah, so to set a little bit of context, I work for the prototyping and customer engineering team for APJ, and we primarily deliver prototypes for our customers on a no-fee basis, spanning about 4 to 6 weeks, solving some of their most complex and challenging problems. Now, 4 to 6 weeks isn't a lot of time, so you can imagine performing those undifferentiated heavy lifting tasks at the start of an engagement, right? I need to set up my repo, I need to figure out how to write an API, where does my code live? All those sorts of bits and pieces do add up. And in the early days, we were finding that we were spending like 1 to 2 weeks potentially, depending on who's doing it, just doing this sort of unvalue-added work. So we thought about, okay, how do we actually bootstrap our projects faster, more securely? And not just bootstrap faster, but we also want to think about how do we actually iterate faster once that code is actually bootstrapped. The third concern we looked into was also long-term maintenance. So if we bootstrap a piece of code and the thing that we bootstrap from changes, how do we actually incorporate those back into our project? So we went about this journey. We looked at some open source tools. Nothing really fit the bill for all three. So we ended up building the AWS PDK, which is the project development kit. It's an open source product we released last year, and it really achieves all three of those concerns. Now, the project development kit allows you to structure your code in such a way that they're actually reusable components, and they can synthesize code out very similar to the way that code Did I just lose audio?
You're right, you're right.
The way that CDK code can synthesize infrastructure, Progen and PDK can actually synthesize anything. So you're really only limited by your imagination in terms of the constructs that you can create. Now, the PDK does require a little bit of coding to get started. So we thought about how do we actually get down to a no-code solution. And voila, Code Catalyst came along, and we decided to build our own blueprints.
All right, he has prepared a lot of demos for you, so I'm going to hand over the sacred clicker and just let him take over. Over to you.
Great. OK, so I'm going to run you through a walkthrough. We're going to build a full-stack application in about 10 minutes, hopefully. So I'm going to get started. So we've got 5 blueprints to show off today. So the PDK blueprints are actually composable. It's the first of its kind in Code Catalyst. So we're going to start off with a monorepo blueprint. So as you may have expected, it creates a monorepo for you, and NX is the build engine under the covers. So we'll go ahead and configure our blueprint. So here we can select from one of 3 languages, and these 3 languages can be mixed and matched throughout all of our blueprints that we're going to see today. Now, the monorepo blueprint, it sets up basic CRUD files, right? Like lint configurations, npm, RCs, all the kind of typical stuff that you would expect. But it also does more than that. It manages things like your package JSON. So as you add more and more blueprints, it'll set up workspace dependencies for you. And it also supports polyglot dependencies. It manages things like dev files. So when you actually create a dev environment, like we will later, all of your global dependencies and runtimes will be readily available. And then we also manage a bunch of other files too, like NX configuration, all on your behalf. So I've gone ahead and created that blueprint. So that's the foundation for all of the next blueprints. It's a prerequisite. So let's actually do something a bit more interesting. Let's create an API. And not just any API, we're going to create a type-safe API. Now, I'm not going to take credit for this. Jack Stevenson, my colleague, is actually the one that built this, so all credit goes to him. But basically, this allows you to define an API in declarative terms, in layman's terms. So I'm a pretty simple guy. When I think of building an API, I think of what are my operations, what are my inputs, and what are my outputs. And that's exactly what this allows you to do. You can pick between one of 2 model definition languages, Smithy or OpenAPI. So in the example you see on screen, we're going to be showing Smithy. And you can literally define your operations, inputs, and outputs, and we generate all of the boilerplate for you. So if you look at the configuration on the left-hand side, we've got things like CDK language, handler languages, so what languages do you want to actually implement your APIs in, and also documentation formats. So if you want to generate redoc documentation, we can generate all that for you. Now, we'll go ahead and apply this blueprint. And you'll notice that it hasn't actually enacted the change instantaneously. The reason why is because we're actually building up an application over time. So we want to be able to preview the changes in the form of a PR, review them, and if we're happy, we can go ahead and merge them. Or we can make changes, if so be it. So we've got the API. Don't worry too much. I'm going to dive a bit deeper later. But for the time being, let's go ahead and add a website. So we want a website, React-based website. We're going to use Cloudscape as the design system. And what's interesting about this blueprint is it's actually aware of other blueprints in my project. So I can pass in one or more of the APIs I've previously created. This will not only create a React application for you, it'll set up all of your API dependencies between your local packages for your clients and your hooks. It'll make sure that SIGV4 is happening for all of your APIs. So when you actually do make API calls through the interactive API Explorer that we actually create for you, which is built using Swagger, you can rest assured that all your API calls are secure. So again, similar to the type-safe API, we're going to go ahead and apply that and go through the review and merge process. So we've got our API and our website hooked up. We need some infrastructure to actually manage our AWS resources. So let's go ahead and set that up. We've got a blueprint for that as well. So we've got the infrastructure blueprint. What this is going to do, anyone that's used the CDK new command to create a brand new application, this effectively does that for you. But it actually writes the CDK code for you for your resources based on the components that I'm selecting on the dropdowns. So here I'm saying I want CDK to be written in TypeScript, and I want type-safe API and my website to be managed. And you'll see on screen it's actually generating a stack with all of those components already pre-wired. And if we preview the API construct, this is actually setting up policy statements for you, API gateway, mocks, cores, all of those kinds of things, because that's what needs to happen from a website call. So I'll go ahead and merge that in. So now we've got everything we pretty much need. The last step is deployment. So we have a blueprint for that as well, DevOps blueprint. So the DevOps blueprint allows you to have repeatable builds through the form of a Code Catalyst workflow. So here I'm just going to specify the stack name that I previously created in the infrastructure stack. I'm going to specify which account I'd like to actually deploy into. And obviously, I'll select Sydney as the region, because that's where we are. And I'll go ahead and preview my change. Now, you'll notice that there's 2 workflow files that get vendored for you. There's a pull request workflow that runs a build test cycle whenever you raise a pull request. And there's also the release workflow that runs whenever you merge code to your main branch. You'll notice that there's a special license checker task there. It verifies that all of your dependencies across Python, Java, and Node are in that approved list. And more importantly, we also generate lock files for every language as well. Super, super important from a CI/CD perspective, because when you actually go ahead and merge your code in, you're guaranteed to actually install those dependencies against those pinned versions. So in the rare event that you need to ever roll back, you're always going to pull back that same set of dependencies. So I've sped up time. We've done a deployment. I could end the presentation there and show you the sample app, but I actually want to show you how PDK can actually help you iterate faster as well, not just Bootstrap. So we'll create VS Code and add a slightly beefier instance, because why not? And this is going to open up our IDE. And we're ready to rock and roll. We've got all of our runtimes, everything pre-ready, so I can just run my install command. This will install all of my local dependencies defined in my package JSON, and I can actually start implementing an API straight away. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the say hello operation, and I'm just going to change that to build a simple adder. So we'll add 2 integers together and return the result. Now, if we open up the operation for the sum operation, rather, we'll change a few of the settings there. So we'll replace all of the hellos with sum. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the handler trait. So that's a custom trait that we've added to Smithy. And what that does is when we build our code, it's going to take that model, and it's actually going to generate Lambda stubs for you. And those stubs are not going to look like anything you've seen before. They're going to be completely type safe. So you'll be able to reference variables via your IDE auto-completion. You'll get build time errors now. And it just makes life a heck of a lot simpler. In addition to that, it also comes pre-integrated with Power Tools, with X-Ray, and with CloudWatch logs. So now we can just go ahead and update our main API file to point it to sum, and we can go ahead and build our code. Now, I'm also passing in a parallel flag here. So this makes use of NX's concurrent build capability. So we can now build with up to 8 cores in parallel, and we can actually leverage cached results as well. So if you only change something at a top-level package, that's the only one you need to build. So as you can see now, I've got the stub, and I'm implementing it using auto-completion. So there's a little red squiggly up the top. As I complete this, that's going to go away, and I know that this code is going to compile and work. Well, it should work. Similar thing for the unit test, right? So I can go ahead and do that with an auto-completion style. Now, this is really great, as it completely removes a whole class of runtime errors that you may have experienced before. Like, who's ever gone through a deployment and they've passed through a variable, and on the server side, they're casting it wrong, or they're expecting an integer, or whatever it may be? Those whole class of problems go away now. OK, so we're just finishing up with our unit test, and now we're done implementing our API. So the final step is to make sure that our API is actually wired into our infrastructure. So we're just going to open up our API construct in the CDK infrastructure package. By default, we mock everything, so we're actually going to change that, and we're going to pass in the sum operation that we just created. Again, the infrastructure is also type safe. So I'm passing in an integration for a Lambda, which is a sum function. Sum function is also generated for you, and it points to the actual bundle that's created from that piece of code that we just created. So all of that glue code, you don't have to worry about anymore. We're done. We've built our API. So let's go ahead and actually build the code. And what we're going to do is, once this completes, you'll actually notice that we're using some cached results here. So we didn't have to actually rebuild every single package. We only built, I think, 3 of them. We can also preview what the infrastructure is going to look like when we deploy it. And if we're happy, we can go ahead and merge it in. Now, since we've created that workflow, our workflow should trigger, and we should see a full build, test, and deployment cycle. So there we go. We're going to speed up time slightly. And once that completes, we'll open up the deployment action, grab the CloudFront distribution URL, and plug that into our browser, and we can see the finished product. So now I've pre-created a Cognito user, so I can just go ahead and add the details there. MFA, of course. And we've got our website up and running. Now, we've got the sum operation in there. I haven't written a single line of UI code, but it's reflective of my API. I can add in my input parameters, and I should expect that to be 10, which it is. So that's how easy it is to build APIs with TypeSafe API and the PDK. The final thing I wanted to talk about was long-term maintenance. So I've bootstrapped my code. And let's say tomorrow a Blueprint author has updated their code. I want to be able to pull that change in. With traditional templating engines, that's not possible, right? You have to fork the code or patch it or cherry pick it. Now you can simply click a button, preview the change, and you'll get a pull request. So in this case, we've got an update to the approved licenses file. We've added the Amazon software license as an approved license. This is a very trivial example, but imagine this expanding to something much larger. Imagine it spanning to global configuration, right? Global lint configurations in your business, or even security might own a blueprint to manage deployments of pipelines. The same process applies. So that's what I have for you today.
That is amazing. What do you need 4 to 6 weeks for? I mean,
It does take a long time.
yeah. Now, I know everyone in here, you've just gotten hooked on PDK. How do they get their hands on it?
Yeah, so little surprise, slightly a launch announcement. So we've just released everything that you've seen today publicly. So they're available on the Code Catalyst service in all regions. We've also got a tutorial online on the documentation website, so please go and check it out. Unfortunately, I don't have the links for you, so if you need them, you can come and see me, or you can just do a quick Google search, and they should hopefully pop up.
You're going to be at the developer lounge,
Yes,
right?
I'll be at
If you
the
want to go
developer
find
lounge.
him for questions. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Perfect.
Please join me.
Enjoy the rest of Summit.
Now, we are pretty much at time, so I'm going to try and quickly wrap all of this together. So what did we cover today? Well, I told you we were going to talk about how we at AWS are innovating to try and allow your teams to move faster, to accelerate development, and to enhance your creativity. We talked to you about some tools, some Gen AI tools, some not Gen AI tools, like the PDK blueprints you just saw, that are going to really help you and that are built responsibly with security and privacy baked right in. And we talked about how we're trying to empower a broader set of developers to build on the cloud. I also talked about how, unfortunately, the majority of your day is not spent writing code. It's spent doing all this other undifferentiated heavy lifting. And we walked through the stages of the development lifecycle and how we're trying at every stage to make your life easier, using tools, using AI to reduce or even eliminate some of that stuff that keeps you away from the parts of your job that bring you joy. And really, it's all about reimagining the developer experience. We're going to continue to do this at AWS. We are just scratching the surface. We've just gotten started. We're going to continue to give you innovative tools, abstractions, opinionated guidance that solves problems for you and your teams. And we're really dedicated to empowering developers like you to accelerate, create, and shape the future. So I want to say thanks for being here. Thanks to my co-speakers, to Stephen and Adrian. I also want to give a shout out to Nadia Rehani, a community builder who was going to be here with us and unfortunately couldn't be here. We miss you, Nadia. We are so excited to see what's next. We are so excited to see what you build. Thank you very much.